Hey everyone, and welcome back. We've got a deep dive ready for you all today, all about modern relationships.
Buckle up.
Yeah, exactly. We found this really cool interview with Heverton Anunciação.
Oh, yeah, I know him.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, he wrote the book, The Mathematics of Emotions.
That's the one. I was so fascinated by it.
He's got some really interesting ideas about modern relationships and how they work.
Yeah, and you know what stood out to me? It's not just like armchair philosophy.
Right.
He's actually done a ton of research, like across 24 countries
Yeah.
and thousands of interviews.
Yeah, global perspective for sure.
Which I think is so important because, love and relationships, they're not just a Western thing.
Definitely not. There are some universal truths, but also...
Yeah, but also fascinating differences.
Exactly.
So we're going to try to unpack some of that today. One of the things I wanted to start with was his 30-year-old marriage rule.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic Enunciação.
Right. He even wrote a whole book about it. Never get married before 30.
I think a lot of people, especially men, really resonated with that message.
I can see why.
Yeah.
It makes sense on some level, right? Like you need time to figure yourself out, your career.
All of that. Yeah, and he was seeing in his research back then that couples who waited longer tended to have more successful relationships.
Longer lasting, for sure.
Yeah, and he initially attributed it to men needing more time to mature emotionally.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets interesting. He's actually revisiting that rule now.
Really?
Yeah, he's suggesting that maybe 40 is the new 30.
Wow. So the goalposts have shifted.
I think it reflects how much society has changed just in the last few decades.
I mean, think about it. People are staying in school longer, taking longer to settle into careers.
And the whole landscape of dating has transformed with online dating apps and all that.
It's a whole new world out there, and marriage might not fit into the same timeline anymore.
Plus, he's also noticed this trend of women becoming more financially independent, especially in Brazil.
Right. That's a huge factor. It's like the old script where the man is the provider is kind of being flipped on its head.
Yeah, and Anunciação is really interested in how that's impacting relationships. He's not saying it's good or bad. He's just observing how it's changing the dynamics.
It's like we're all figuring out this new dance together, men and women.
Exactly. And there are going to be some missteps along the way, for sure.
Okay, well, let's talk about missteps, because one thing Anunciação talks about that I found so fascinating is what he calls the mathematics of emotions.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's so simple, but it really makes you think.
Right. So for our listeners who haven't heard of it, his basic formula is this: S equals RE.
Satisfaction equals results minus expectations.
And when you apply that to relationships, it's like a light bulb moment.
It really is. Think about it. If your expectations are sky high going into a relationship.
Yeah, like you're expecting a fairy tale romance.
Right. Even if the reality is objectively good, you might still end up feeling dissatisfied.
Because it doesn't live up to that fantasy.
Exactly. And this is where Enunciação gets into the importance of self-awareness.
Knowing yourself, what you truly want, what you're willing to compromise on.
And being able to communicate that to your partner.
Which honestly is a whole other challenge.
Communication is key. He talks a lot about this phenomenon he calls emotional melandrosity.
Emotional what?
Melandrosity. It basically means oversensitivity. Like people are tiptoeing around each other's feelings, afraid to be direct.
Ah, so it's like that whole thing where you say, I'm fine, when you're actually not fine at all.
Exactly. And he thinks it's a big problem in modern dating.
Because you're not really being honest with each other.
And you're not building that foundation of trust and open communication.
So what's the antidote to this melandrosity?
Enunciação is a big advocate for open and honest communication, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes.
So being upfront about what you want and what you need?
Yes. Ditch the games and be authentic.
Okay, but how do you do that without scaring people off? Like especially in the early stages of dating.
He believes that authenticity is actually more attractive in the long run.
So it's about finding someone who appreciates you for who you are.
Exactly. Flaws and...
Which is easier said than done, right?
It takes courage to be vulnerable, but he believes it's worth it.
Okay, so let's say you found that person. You're being honest with each other. Things are going well. How do you keep that spark alive over time?
That's a great question, and it's something Anunciação addresses in his work too. He believes that maintaining intimacy after the honeymoon phase fades takes effort.
So it's not just going to happen magically.
Right. It requires conscious effort from both partners.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, he's a big advocate for regular date nights, even if it's just a simple dinner at home.
Just making time for each other.
Exactly. Putting the relationship on the calendar.
Because it's so easy to get swept up in the busyness of life.
And he also emphasizes the importance of physical touch, affection, intimacy.
even when you've been together for years and years?
He believes that physical connection is a vital part of maintaining a strong emotional bond.
I love that. It's like a reminder to never take each other for granted.
Exactly. To keep making an effort to connect on all levels.
Now I'm curious about what he has to say about conflict. Because let's be real, every relationship has its ups and downs.
Oh, absolutely. He actually has some really interesting views on conflict. He doesn't see it as something to be avoided at all costs.
Which is kind of counterintuitive, right? Like we're often told to avoid conflict at all costs.
Yeah, but he sees conflict as an opportunity for growth.
So it's about how you handle the conflict.
Exactly. He encourages couples to view challenges as a chance to learn more about each other to strengthen their communication skills.
So it's about working through those disagreements together.
And coming out stronger on the other side.
Which, again, requires a lot of communication.
Communication is the thread that runs through all of this.
Okay, I feel like we've just scratched the surface here.
He's only just begun. There's so much more to unpack.
All right, well, we'll definitely be diving deeper into Anunciação's insights and what he has to say about some of these trickier topics. So stay tuned.
This is going to be good. So, we were talking about how Anunciação looks at relationships as part of this bigger picture, right? Like it's not just about the romantic stuff. It's about all the other connections in our lives.
Right, he's not just a love guru. He's looking at the whole human experience.
Exactly. And one thing he really emphasizes is the importance of friendships.
Friendships.
Yeah, not just for our own well-being, but for the health of our romantic relationships, too.
I hadn't really thought about it that way.
He's got this quote that I love. He says, "Invest in your friendships as if they were retirement funds for one day. They may be all you have left."
Wow, that's pretty intense.
It is, but it makes you think, right? Like, how often do we put our romantic relationships on a pedestal and kind of neglect those other important connections?
It's like once we find the one, our friends become less important.
And he's saying that's a mistake.
Because
those friendships can actually sustain us through the tough times in a way that romantic relationships sometimes can't.
you mean like if you go through a breakup or a job loss or something like that?
Exactly. Or even just the everyday stresses of life. Having a strong support network can make all the difference.
So it's like having a safety net. A group of people who know you, love you, and will be there for you no matter what.
And he argues that cultivating strong friendships now can actually benefit your future relationships.
How so?
Well, people with solid support networks tend to be more resilient when facing challenges.
They've got people to lean on.
Exactly. And that can make them better partners because they're not bringing all that baggage into the relationship.
Makes sense. So it's not just about finding the one, it's about building a whole community of love and support.
And he mentions other thinkers like Contardo Caligaris and Flavio Gicuvate, who've also written about the importance of friendship.
I've heard of them. They're big names in the relationship world, right?
They are. And they've all observed that as traditional social structures change, friendships become even more crucial.
You mean like people moving away from their hometowns, not being as close to their families?
Exactly. Friendships become your chosen family in a way.
So it's like investing in your future happiness, both romantically and personally.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've talked about friendships, but I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about women's financial independence.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one for Anunciação.
It seems like such a game changer for relationships.
He's seen it firsthand in his research, especially in Brazil.
You mean more women are working, pursuing careers?
Exactly. And it's shifting the balance of power within relationships.
So it's not just about who brings home the bacon anymore.
Right. It's about having equal footing in the relationship.
Making decisions together.
And having mutual respect and autonomy.
I think a lot of women would say that's long overdue.
Anunciação definitely sees it as a positive thing. He thinks it leads to more balanced and equitable partnerships.
And probably healthier relationships overall.
He even argues that financial independence can boost women's confidence and self-esteem.
Which can only be a good thing, right?
But he also acknowledges that it can be challenging for some men.
You mean men who are used to being the breadwinner?
Yeah, some men struggle to adapt to these new roles and expectations.
It's like they need to rewrite their own script.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
where communication comes in again.
Being open and honest about how these changes make you feel.
And finding a new way to balance things out.
It's like renegotiating the terms of the relationship.
To make sure it works for both partners.
Okay, so we've talked about financial independence, but what about cultural differences,
Oh, yeah. Anunciação has some really interesting observations about that, too.
especially between Brazil and Europe, right?
He's noticed some big contrasts in how people approach dating and relationships.
Like what?
Well, he finds that in Brazil, there's a lot more passion and intensity in the early stages.
Like fireworks?
Exactly. Whereas in Europe, he's noticed a more gradual and cautious approach.
So it's like playing it cool versus going all in,
And he also points out that Brazilian women are often more expressive and affectionate.
which can lead to misunderstandings.
Sometimes, yeah. But he's not saying one approach is better than the other.
It's just about being aware of those cultural differences.
Exactly. And understanding that there's no one right way to do relationships.
And maybe even learning from each other.
He's noticed that Brazilian women are learning from European and North American women who are less likely to mother their partners.
So it's like a cross-cultural exchange of relationship styles.
And he thinks it's leading to more balanced partnerships where both people feel empowered.
It's like we're all figuring this out together no matter where we're from.
Exactly. And communication is at the heart of it all.
Okay, so we've talked about friendships, financial independence, cultural differences.
Yeah.
It seems like communication is the common thread.
It really is. Anunciação believes that open, honest communication is the foundation of any strong relationship.
But it's not just about talking, right? It's about really listening and understanding each other.
And that's something we'll delve into more deeply in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we're back and ready to keep unpacking this idea of communication because, as we've been talking about, it seems like it's the key that unlocks so much in a relationship.
It really is. And Anunciação has some fascinating observations about how cultural differences play into communication styles, too.
Yeah, we touched on that a bit earlier, but I'd love to hear more.
Well, he talks about how in Brazil, there's this tendency to be very expressive,
Like lots of passion, lots of drama.
Exactly. And sometimes that can be misinterpreted by people from cultures where communication is more understated.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Right. And he's seen this cause friction in relationships where one partner is from a more expressive culture and the other is from a more reserved culture.
So how do you bridge that gap?
Well, Anunciação believes that these differences can actually be a source of growth for both partners.
Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it.
It's about recognizing that there's no one right way to communicate.
And being open to learning from each other.
Yeah. Exactly. He encourages couples to approach these differences with curiosity and willingness to adapt.
So instead of getting frustrated when your partner communicates in a way that's unfamiliar,
You try to understand where they're coming from.
and maybe even pick up some new communication skills along the way.
Exactly. It's like expanding your communication repertoire.
I like that. So it's not about trying to change each other
It's about meeting in the middle.
and finding a way to communicate that works for both of you.
And this ties back to what we were talking about earlier with Brazilian women learning from other cultures.
You mean about not mothering their partners?
Exactly. It's a shift in communication style, but it's also a shift in the dynamics of the relationship,
It's about creating a more equal partnership,
where both people feel heard and respected.
and that requires clear communication.
About needs, expectations, boundaries.
Everything.
And this is where Anunciação's mathematics of emotions comes back into play.
So it's not just about managing expectations in general.
It's about managing your expectations for how your partner will communicate.
Because if you're expecting them to read your mind or to communicate in a way that's not natural for them,
You're setting yourself up for disappointment.
and probably a lot of unnecessary arguments.
He encourages couples to be really mindful of their own communication patterns.
Like, what are your triggers?
What are your blind spots?
How do you tend to interpret things?
And to approach conversations with a willingness to listen and to learn.
It's like becoming a student of your partner's communication style.
Exactly. And that can lead to some really profound breakthroughs in intimacy and connection.
Because when you feel truly heard and understood,
It creates a sense of safety and vulnerability,
and that's where the magic happens.
the magic of deep connection.
Wow. Well, I don't know about you, but this conversation has really got me thinking about my own communication patterns.
Me too. It's a constant work in progress.
But I think that's the beauty of it.
We're always learning and growing.
And that's what keeps relationships interesting.
Anunciação's work is a great reminder that relationships are a journey, not a destination.
There will be bumps along the way.
But with open communication and a willingness to learn from each other,
We can navigate those bumps and create something truly special.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Heverton Anunciação.
We hope you found his insights as thought-provoking as we did.
And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic.
Share your experiences, your challenges, your triumphs.
Let's keep the conversation going.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep diving deep.
See you last time.